Hi and welcome to our talk. This is, we're going to talk about the beat versus shooting. If you were an add-on in May, you might have recognized some parts of this talk, but I promise you there are some new things too. First of all, we're going to start with giving you an outline about what we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to spend a little time, bit of time introducing ourselves. All right.
First. So, hello, my name is Milla. I'm the lead designer at The Outsiders, a FUNCOM studio where I coordinate a small team of designers. I also do a little bit of everything, game design, some writing, a lot of spreadsheets and numbers. And featured here in the picture, and here with me on the stage, we have Adam.
Hello, my name is Adam. I'm the lead combat designer. And as a combat designer, I'm basically responsible for all the moment-to-moment action. I work with the guns, the enemies, and the bosses in-game. Also, I think this is like a week after Milla started, and she was hopeful and I was not. Our team is based in Stockholm, and we worked on this feels weird, but the award-winning rhythm shooter called Hellsinger. Has anyone heard of that game before? Woo! That's awesome! And for you who haven't heard it, I'm so excited that you're going to be seeing this for the first time. But first.
Oh, yeah, okay. So a little background note before everything else. Here's me as a kid playing solitaire on my aunt's computer for hours on end during a family gathering, because when you won, that means that the cards would start jumping around, and that was just about the coolest thing I had ever seen. It started early, chasing that high. But I'm showing this because I want to talk about that before my career began, I was a high school dropout that failed math because I would rather be writing songs. And after a couple of years of straight jobs, I caught up on my studies a bit, and I got into game development when I was in my late 20s. We're sharing this because I think that there's this idea that to be successful or to even survive in this industry, you have to have had this all-consuming passion for games your entire life, or you have to be familiar with every single game in the universe. I think that's nonsense. Having the financial means to grow up with games and consoles, it's a privilege. And so is having the opportunity to study games at an actual school at some point in life. I think it's good to acknowledge that, so that things can change. Part of this talk is about how having a background outside of games has actually helped me in my day-to-day job. And so yeah, have different backgrounds is what I'm trying to say. It makes for better games.
So what is this talk about? Well, we're going to start about describing Milla Hellsinger for those of you who might not be familiar with the game. And we don't speak French, sorry. So if you've been talking about it, we've actually missed it and we haven't noticed. And then we're going to talk a bit about our experiences and some of the challenges that we encountered along the way while working on Milla Hellsinger, and how we got through a couple of the themes. Our hope is to present tangible learnings for you for each theme that we go through, and then we're going to end up with questions and answers. So, as a bit of expectation management, these are our learnings and only one way of doing things. And if you find that following our principles compromises what you're trying to do, rest assured, I think there's many different solutions to the same problem. And I think we should be wrong sometimes, and games need to say something. Secondly, we don't think that we are done learning our craft, but writing this talk has forced us to go back and look at a lot of the progress that we made over the years, and both individually and as a team in studio. So, who are you? You're curious about music or beat matching as a core component of gameplay. If you're already working on a rhythm game of any kind, these takeaways are perhaps not quite as mind-blowing as you'd hope, but I'll hope you stay here for the anecdotes at least. On the other hand, you might just be curious or thinking about making a rhythm game, and some of our learnings might help you and push you in the right direction. Who knows? So without further ado, then, what is Milla Hellsinger? Milla Hellsinger is a rhythm first-person shooter with the ability to shoot on beat will enhance your gameplay experience. The more you're in sync with the rhythm, the more you gonna play with the beat, or like the more the music will open up. So this is like the fourth level of the game, There's no sound, maybe? This is always happening.
We should be having sound.
Yeah, we should be having sound. Like, this is half the game. It's about sound. Well, I'm so sorry for this. I hope you can check this trailer or this video. Well, anyhow, the game consists of a linear main campaign, and each one of those levels unlocks are coupled with separate arenas challenges that we call tournaments. There are 4 difficulty settings, and the goal is to make it through the 8 hells and defeat the big bad at the end. The multiplier, as you see, like the big 16x, it goes up when you perform actions to the beat, and at the 16x it reaches its full arrangement, and you get to hear the vocals as well, which is a big part of the game. The campaign level spaces are also set up in a way that lets sections of the song play out over the level as you progress, with parts remaining in loop if the player remains in a space of the map. So as you're progressing through the map, so will the song as well do. You can liken it to a verse in the song or different acts, as we call them. They play out over the stage as you move along. Encounter space 1 contains act 1 and so on. And that's... And lastly, the music. Metal Hellsinger started out with an original soundtrack written by 2 feathers and lending the performance, and also lending the performance of some world-class artists. Metal Hellsinger has a set list made out of Dennis from Refused, Matt Heafty from Trivium, and Alisa Whiteglass from Arch Enemy. Just speaking about 2 of them. And speaking about them making me really psyched up, because I'm a big metal fan, and I would just love her and stay here and talk about the songs, and we don't even have sound for it, goddammit. So let's talk about the gameplay instead. Do I have to be a musician in order to make a rhythm game?
Thank you for asking, Adam. So, no, I guess is the short answer, but it helps. There's a lot of technical jargon within music theory as a field, and I am sure it would have been great if everyone at our studio could have had that uploaded into our brains at the start of our project, Matrix style. Having a common language or terminology for the stuff you're working on is naturally going to be good for communication, and we do still try to have a consistent language for the stuff we're working on, and we do still struggle on that note sometimes, no pun intended. Now, I am not personally a classically trained musician, but I did have some piano lessons in my childhood, and I'm a decent campfire guitarist. However, I don't think I ever expected to have to talk to my colleagues about things like beats, measures, time signatures, as it relates to my game design work. But this ended up being one of the first things on the job for me, to talk to our brilliant audio team, 2 Feathers, about which aspects of the tracks that they had made meshed really well with the game we were making, and which parts were maybe more difficult to convey to the player, intuitively at least. So let me share one example that I was reminded of myself recently. Thank you, Nicholas. We had one section in the earlier songs, which for our game means one of the earlier levels. And there was this part in the main campaign where, in the earlier levels, and the music went into this really, atmospheric and dark riff, because that was what the environment looked like. It was a dark and atmospheric crypt, if I remember correctly. And I was hosting small playtests with friends, basically, and it was revealed pretty quickly that players were struggling in this particular crypt for some reason. And they just kept losing the beat. I had a feeling it was because of this variation in rhythm, this syncopated beat that was going on. And if you don't know what a syncopated beat is, it is basically the unexpected in-between beat in an otherwise predictable sequence. So this means that it can make the main beat sound a little weak, or like you're beat matching to what's essentially a little break. And something like that, in my opinion, it needs to be designed for carefully. You gotta be careful with cool bridges and stuff in your original soundtrack. So, is that you? Is that someone over there?
Is this someone's phone?
God damn it. But yeah, you gotta be careful with cool music stuff. in your game. And so anyway, that thing, we changed it. And it turns out our players did not struggle. So what can we learn from this? When it comes to music, having ways to communicate about music and music theory, it is great. In the example I just described, I think my own experience writing music really helped me pinpoint the issue that I was seeing, which helped me communicate better to the people, to the right people. And that helps speed up the process of fixing it. So yes, it helps. I don't want that to be disheartening though, because I suspect that this is the case for, well, any game where there's a pre-existing field of knowledge that can help you. I used to work on historical strategy games, and there was a ton of terminology to pick up on there as well. But for the individual developer, it is rarely the case of like a lack of information. It's how to parse that information and how to put a sequence of beats into words that make sense for you, but also for you to be able to explain it to a teammate, and often in text. So I would consider a glossary. It really helps you if you have a definition of what a beat is across disciplines. And what is a measure? Maybe have a conversation. And when it comes to glossaries, just a file with the most common words you're going to be using could be helpful. You probably don't need everything. If you're working in the field of music or some other scientific field, you're not going to need everything, because there's a lot. And if you don't do this, this is no shade, but a lot of the time coders, Adam does a bit of coding, coders are just going to name stuff, whatever, and that is going to haunt you. So choose your words and your names carefully. I am never getting over the fact that we have something in the game, not player-facing mind, only editor, so for my own eyes only, that is called a melody, and it has nothing to do with a melody. I think it sounded good probably one day 3 years ago, and we did not know how many music keywords we were going to want. So that said, don't underestimate your teammates either. I know Adam started out with no prior experience in music theory, and you've learned a lot. It also happened kind of gradually, so I almost didn't notice. But as an example, each weapon in the game, it fires to its own sequence of rhythm, and he spent a lot of time setting those up. He asked for my input for a DLC weapon recently, and I fell down a deep rabbit hole trying to figure it out. So music is hard, combat is hard, and I have the utmost respect for the work that you do. And that brings me to my final point, learning that is to stay curious, because as we have this living example of, a bunch of stuff can be learned. Figure out to what extent you need it. It probably depends on your role. And maybe read a book or find a fun and niche podcast. But also just ask your colleagues if you don't know. That is key, I think, because if someone does, they will be happy to tell you, and then you both learn. So music theory aside, we also have to make sure the player understands that they're working within a little time window, really, for everything they're doing. And how do you make the player understand that time is passing and it's important? A lot of the rhythm games, a lot of them use scrolling UI of some kind to signal what needs to happen. Examples that pop into my head is the note highway from Guitar Hero. It comes at you. And similarly, we have Beat Saber that has highway-looking UI. It scrolls, well, it moves you along the path of the music. And in Dance Dance Revolution, another example is, I think the UI scrolls from the bottom up, if I remember correctly. In Crypt of the Necrodancer, the UI kind of moves towards the middle. It's similar to what it does in our game, actually. Lines from the sides that move into the center. But in Necrodancer, it is placed at the bottom of the screen. And this is just my slide for fun, for illustration, some examples of other people throughout history dealing with the same problem of figuring out visualization over time. It's not a new problem, and I find that comforting. So here's what it actually ended up looking like in our game. We tried having this rhythm indicator in different places, like at the top of the screen, the argument being, I don't want to look at it, myself included. But if you need to have a visual indicator to keep the rhythm, center is where to go, turns out. And we're working with a fast-paced shooter, so anything that we put in a peripheral kind of ends up getting forgotten about or ignored. And since matching the beat is such a requirement, yeah, it has to be here, basically. We also have a setting for turning this UI element off or decreasing the opacity, but for the sake of onboarding new players, that is an optional setting and not the default. So what can we learn? Time. It can come at you or a game object, or it can close in on you or a game object. The placement, it depends on what other stuff you need your player to be paying attention to, and which elements on the screen are the most pressure-inducing ones. The more legible, for me as a Westerner at least, the left-to-right reading of time, that seems to me to be reserved for playing the ocarina, maybe. Less hectic gameplay. And then how to visualize time, it ultimately depends on what kind of other genre you're working in. What are the other frameworks you have to bear in mind? If you told me that you're working on a rhythm management game, I would maybe advise against taking up prime real estate that is the middle of the screen. So it depends. And finally, we cannot conclude this topic without giving a shout out to Maria Ström, our UI lead. Thank you for everything you do. And up to you.
Thank you. Right, so we talked a bit about the passing of time, and we talked about a lot about the rhythm, but a question still then remains: what is the beat? And if we go back even further, how do we play rhythmically to the beat? For a fast-paced shooter like Metal, a quarter note acts as a good base for beat matching. A quarter note is also what you base it upon when you're talking about BPM or beats per minute. So that means if we want to sync our actions to the quarter beat or the neighboring note speeds, such as quarter note or eighth note or half note, we want to give the illusion that the actions and the events that you as a player do are happening with the music. So I'd say then that there are two things that we need to understand in order to highlight what the beat is for Hellsingers. First of all, how long is the beat in seconds? We're using a lot of different songs with different BPMs, but for this example, I'm going to start off with a song that's like 120 BPM. That's beats per minute, and we can then derive from that a beat is roughly 0.5 seconds. So 120 divided by 60 is, yeah, straightforward. So now we know the duration of the beat, and that is going to loop throughout the whole song. And we don't, like in Metal, we found that we need to have a beat that stays the same throughout the entirety of a song or a level. By changing that, it's too much for a player to notice that in conjunction with everything else. So we know the duration of a beat. How do I then check my beat versus the input that the player is doing? We want to know if the player is beat matching correct to the beats that the computer is presenting. And this is where frames comes in, or the frames of the computer. So we're running a game at 60 frames per second, and with knowing that half a second is a beat, then we also know that we have 30 frames per second, or per beat. So for beat matching's sake, we need to decide what's on beat and what's off beat. And this is something that we struggled a lot with, like trying to find the golden ratio of what is on beat and off beat. We base that window of calculation from an eighth note, and however, in order to not approve half of the beat, we also need to scale that time down. This is very much a feel situation, I would say, and a situation where you go like, okay, it can't be too long, because if the beat window for what is on beat is too long, then everything is going to be on beat, and you're just playing the game and playing it as a regular shooter instead of actually beat matching. And if it's too small, then it's going to be too hard to beat match, and taking in human perception, machine input, and music into account, that's just not going to feel good in the end. So yeah, take that into account while working with the beat, I would say. So now that we know how and what the beat is, and how we beat match, what can I, the player, do in sync to the beat? In Hellsinger, we have 4 core actions that is performed with the beat. Behaviors outside of those core actions are permutations to beat actions. So first of all, we have the firing on beat, the bread and butter of any shooting game, I would say. But and this action, along with dash, is both allowed to be performed on beat and off beat. We reinforce the behavior, and we give you extra feedback when it's done on beat, but we allow you to do it off beat in order to keep the player in the flow. Even musicians, I wouldn't know, but are off beat once or twice during a song. So we don't want to punish you too much and allow you to move forward. You can also take a look at the main character of Metal Hellsinger, and we want her to be agile and move outside of what is offbeat and onbeat. So it's very important to also check the aesthetic of what you're making. Secondly, we have slaughters, which is the finisher in the game, which, if an enemy is damaged enough, you can just finish them off by a button press and quick reload. These are 2 actions that are that will require you to be on beat. And why is that, you might ask? These are because they yield a higher reward, and for that we really want you to be on beat in order to make it feel really rhythmical. There are also actions that are kind of follow-up reactions, so it made sense to require the beat matching there. So acting to the beat is very important, and I've rambled on long enough about this, but it's the basis of all the actions in Hellsinger. And however, the feedback from the beat actions needs also to happen with the beat, and more importantly, it should happen immediately. If they won't happen immediately, it won't make the player feel rhythmical. So as a first, the action needs to happen on the beat, and the feedback needs to be displayed immediately. Imagine if hitting a cymbal didn't make any sound immediately, and you had to wait a couple of beats. So we can have reactions that follow on the quarter note or 8th note after, but those are follow-up reactions. They're not the immediate feedback that you get into. So as an example, I wish we have sound now, we'll see. Okay. So this is the Vulcan, and at the earlier iteration of it, we allowed it to explode a couple of beats after you fire it. And while it was like, oh, this feels like it's a part of rhythm, and like this feels unique for the game because we're waiting for the beat to happen, it just didn't, it felt sluggish because I didn't get any immediate feedback from pressing the button on beat. So what we ended up with as the release candidate was more of an immediate explosion for it. So let's see. So the Vulcan then becomes like more of an RPG, or like our idea of a crossbow, angelic crossbow, and an RPG come together. Nope. So what do we take away from this? Well, I'd say that the beat is only the vehicle for you as a player or for you as a developer. Like, I think when we're making a rhythm game, we want the player to feel rhythmic. That's the end goal. The beat is like the vehicle that we're using and we're requiring of you as a player. So the goal is then to feel rhythmic. And why am I rambling on about this? Well, the beat gives us a couple of benefits. Except for being the focus of Hellsinger, introducing the beat as a game mechanic that permeates everything gives a foundation that ties visual, sound, and feel together. It sounds rhythmic, it feels rhythmic, it looks rhythmic. By doing this correctly, with having a beat at the core, I believe you can help player find a flow. And please don't quote me on this, because I haven't done my research. But because in Hellsinger, the game asks you to keep the beat at the same time it throws the challenges of a shooter at you, as a player, we ask you to keep all that cognitive focus around enemies, beat, and spatial awareness as well. So when this is going well, the player finds themselves in a state of flow with the beat infusing everything and help you get into it almost. I've seen countless players. This picture is from Games Fest, I believe, but I've seen a lot of testers and players kind of like just after 5 or 10 minute mark, they start bobbing their head. Like, I don't even think they know that they're doing it. So, and that's just because they need to be aware of the music as well as they're doing every other action. So I do believe that helping, like using the beat helps you get into the flow. But I need a break. Keeping the beat is exhausting, and requiring your player to have a cognitive awareness about an event that occurs roughly every 0.5 seconds is exhausting, especially when it requires full focus, attention to enemies and a game. How do I take a break, and am I even allowed to take a break, Milla?
Well, let's talk about that. So, we've established a game like Hellsinger requires your full attention. Before release, we were honestly not sure what to expect from players when it came to, say, streaming. Was this game going to be remotely fun to watch? Because our streamers will sit quietly, very focused and hardly able to talk or engage with their audience for the 10 to 20 minutes it takes them to complete a level. And at the same time, it is nice to see that they look more or less exactly the way we as developers look while we're playtesting our game. And when they're done, it's, this one, just need a little break. So it's our job to balance action and player fatigue. How do you give your player a break in this hectic environment? We have something that I would, for starters, call natural breaks, and that's with quotes because it's really just conventional breaks, I guess. The first example would be from our main campaign. In these levels, through linear progression, we have encounter spaces, and the big fights are called, we have them marked by anguish gates. These are essentially doors that lock behind you when you enter the space, and it unlocks so you can move forwards when you've killed all the enemies that spawned in that area. And when you've done so, a sound effect will play to signal that it's happening, and you, the player, will be like, okay, this is my moment to catch my breath. However, we also have this mechanic, the Fury multiplier at the top of the screen, which affects a lot of stuff in the game. When you're doing well, in addition to gameplay bonuses of various sorts, it also unlocks the full arrangement of the songs. It's only at 16x you can hear the vocals, and it's in the original tracks. And it's a little, I can't believe I'm referencing this, but there's that Jason Statham movie where he has to keep his heartbeat above a certain threshold or he'll explode or whatever. And that's kind of what Hellsinger sometimes feels is one variable tweak away from being. Because if you're not attacking, performing on beat, your Fury multiplier will drop, and you, as a player, will lose your hard-earned momentum. So while a break is welcome, we don't want the players to lose complete sense of urgency. These challenges, these pacing problems that come from downtime, they have been addressed in a few ways. One part is that we have a weapon, that's the skull, and that's the only weapon that increases the fury if used on beat. And you don't even have to be connecting the attack to an enemy. So you basically just rock your little skull and it keeps your multiplier up a little. We also added an in-game object that we call fury boosts that are pickups that can push the multiplier up and allow a player a way back into the fight after, when entering a new arena, basically. However, in spite of these changes, we still had some players who would walk around kind of aimlessly in between encounters. Now that they could keep the multiplier up by just rocking that one weapon, it meant that there was nothing urgent waiting for them in the next arena. They could just go look for items they left behind, pick up some health if they forgot about it. It's not the kind of gameplay we were after, really. So finally, we added, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of this, but we added the time pressure of a score badge, which is a bonus or a malus that gives points depending on how fast you complete the level. So this is something that's applied after you finish a level, and it seems to have done the trick. And I also had written down on the previous slide, resurrections. It's one thing that can happen when the player dies, and depending on your difficulty setting, you might have a resurrection available. We talked about having it done the way it's kind of in Zelda, I suppose, with a pretty intuitive poof, you're back up on your feet immediately. But we decided we liked the more tangible break of, a screen pops up, you have to actually, like active player input, choose to resurrect, because that allows players to take as many breaths as they like before they're thrown back into hell. Then we also have level ends, finishing a boss fight. I thought I had a different picture here, sorry. And you get to continue to the next hell. Maybe you go back to the main menu and play some torments, those challenges we mentioned, or you continue to the next hell. You also get this pretty score summary with the score badge I mentioned, and you do a little light reading maybe before you get back into it. Then there's a tiny note about downsides for limited rooms for breaks, because I can mention that from the artistic perspective, we do have some beautiful vistas that are not necessarily allowed their time to shine, because it's not a game where you have time to stop and smell the pyramids. So what can we learn? Breaks need to be intentional. There are a lot of breaks in any given game that may seem natural or logical, more like. It's not something I have ever thought about so seriously, because it's one of those things that when it works well, you kind of don't notice. Like pausing a game, bringing up the pause menu. It's a pretty good convention, pretty standard. But when the moment-to-moment gameplay is so inextricably tied to the passing of time, we need to evaluate how every single one of those moments tie into the rest of the game, and also have a plan for how to pivot or what to do if they don't fit into the game. And that's you.
So, Hellsinger is not a text-heavy game, and we never wanted it to, but there are words in there. Now, before we start this one, we want to preface that there's a difference between the different types of text in a game. We're not going to be talking about the narrative part much. It might be connected to the lore of the game, but the primary purpose is to guide the player, to keep the player informed about the game state, to finally make them feel at home. For this, the text needs to be mechanically correct, succinct to the point, and it's up to us to make sure that it's cohesive, consistent, predictable, and that the player knows where to access it, where and when. And it's an art to make your points succinctly, and there's a UX layer to the mechanical game writing that I think we take for granted almost sometimes. If an instruction is the full length of a tweet, it's probably too long, and the large number of players will not read it, especially those who come from a game believing that they already know how to play. Because the trickery we have going for it is that if you're familiar with the visual components like crosshair or health bar, it must place like most shooters, right? It's just fucking firing.
Yeah, no. It's not like most shooters. And now I've personally worked a lot on the onboarding and tutorializing of our game. And for context, the last project I helped design the onboarding for before Hellsinger was Crusader Kings 3, a grand strategy game by Paradox Interactive. And the Crusader Kings series is, well, they're games I can only describe as very text-heavy. If you want to play them and be good at it, as in understand what is happening to you, you have a lot of reading and patience to go through. So for Hellsinger, we stared at this problem for a bit. I need to inform the player that this is not a regular shooter. And we finally admitted that, okay, fine, we need to have text. We need to have game terms, maybe a vocabulary that we communicate clearly with to our player. And we need to write some instructions. Now, we did have loading screens with brief instruction, like hints, and they were very helpful, and still are, I think. But when you're working on a game with less clearly established conventions, the challenge of telling the player what to do and how to do it well, I don't think it can be done without verbal guidance. So, sure, we said, let's get some text in there, hoping the player will even be able to pay attention to it. And this brings me back to an earlier topic, actually, pauses. and how they need to be so intentional. The fact that the onboarding, or like that it should pause the game, that our instructions should pause the action and the rhythm, the musical experience, it was not an easy sell, even within the team. And it was also sort of a technical challenge. So I am grateful to every single one of our friends who were subjected to playtesting with us during the pandemic, because it turns out that was invaluable to us. And also turns out that even players who self-report in playtests as, I hate reading, I don't read in games, they do read. They just have to get stuck first. And what happens then is usually, from what I've gleaned from talking to them, that they do so in their own time. One said, I want to go looking in the menus myself, thank you. Because that's agency, and they're learning on their terms, which is fine by me. I just have to make sure that they know where to look. So in the game, we have a small in-game database we call the Compendium, and it lists important game concepts. There's also a bestiary that talks a bit about the enemies. And these are both available for the player to peruse at their leisure, even if they miss stuff in the first 50 minutes of the game where I was bombarding them with text. We also have, not text-based though, but another onboarding thing, we have these shorter arena challenges that we talked about, the tournaments outside of the main campaign, and they focus on 1 or 2 mechanics at a time, and they double as onboarding and skill honing, really. You can also earn sigils, they're basically gameplay modifiers that you can bring into the regular campaign to make certain aspects of the game more manageable for you. So, what can we learn? Breaks still need to be intentional. And don't count on players reading the words just because they're on screen. Consider a glossary for the player this time. And playtest, playtest, playtest.
All right, so as you might have guessed, because we're working with machines and we're working with humans, we have some kind of latency as a challenge. And at some point, you're going to have to accept that there is going to be players out there whom the setup, including audio calibration and such, won't be great or perfect. And people use different hardware. Some people prefer wireless headset, and it's especially frustrating in the case of a generally skilled player struggling with the rhythmic aspect of the game. And we have to accommodate for them too, regardless of whether it's due to their sense of rhythm or there's something technical going on. Because, it's given that the reason they want to turn down or even enter the game at a lower difficulty is that they're bad at what at initial glance looks like 90% of the game.
It's not a given.
It's not a given.
No.
I can't read that. It could be that they're struggling to stay on beat, which in turn does affect the rest of the game experience and the perceived difficulty, as I have described, affects the damage you deal and the points you score and so on. Yet, in a shooter, changing the difficulty can and probably should affect combat in a number of ways. Yet, there's a balance to strike in who you're accommodating for, and what if all of your player was looking for is not to have to struggle with the beat matching. They just want to fire with the beat, not be perfect all the time, right?
Sure, yeah. So, of course, there are adjustments to be made in this regard as well. The most obvious one, when it comes to fixing the beat matching, so to speak, I guess, would be adjusting the time window you have for hitting the beat. And we did that for a while. But what we ended up doing instead, moving away from that, was to address the perfect input window. Because you can get goods, as you see in this GIF. Anyway, you get good and perfect. And good is fine, but perfect gives you more points and it's a little better. So the overall time window turned out to be something we didn't really want to mess with. It got inconsistent across the difficulty levels. And what this means, though, the way we currently have it, is that you should be able to, at around the same frequency, be on beat in general on all difficulty settings. But only really skilled players will be the ones hitting the perfects. And so, This one is going to get a little technical, please bear with me. The time window, it is based on the BPM, the beats per minute in our game, but it wasn't always. So this is going to be a slide with hypothetical examples. So the orange part here is the perfect time window. So when it was based on actual seconds, we found that playing a slower song could be harder because it meant you had to be more precise. As you have like your relative time window for pulling off the on-beat input, it is smaller with a faster, or it's smaller than with a faster BPM. And it is complicated, so I'm going to try to use numbers. We all love numbers. When the beat window was set to seconds, it was, for example, 0.3 seconds. At 120 BPM, 0.3 seconds is 60% of the entire beat. That means 40% room for error. On a faster song, 170 BPM, say, the real-time time window, it won't keep up. Oh my God. With the beat matching time window still set to 0.3 seconds, the window for success, 0.3 seconds still, the entire beat is now 0.35 seconds. So this means that the window for error, or for missing the beat, it's like 40 milliseconds. You would basically be unable to miss. So scale it to BPM. And there are a lot of systems in the game, or in most games, that derive from real-time seconds. For a while, we had the Fury multiplier, the one at the top that we talk about a lot. That one would have its drop or fading behavior be based on seconds. And for an average player, this made it easier to play well during faster songs because the player had more time, which meant more opportunities to achieve successful on-beat inputs before the time had time to affect the system. So it's complicated. What can we learn from this, though? Consider your audience and who are you accommodating for? That really is what it's about. If you're making a shooter with rhythm elements, you're making a rhythm elements with shooter. I can't even, my brain froze from all of this. Sorry. Core vision, yes. Who are you trying to make it easier for? And please tie your time-based modifiers to BPM unless you want it to be tied to an indirect difficulty change. Our game could be played at 200 BPM and it would basically be the same game. Everything scales. It's just a little nuts. And still fun.
Yeah. I think the fastest song right now, we just released a couple of more songs. I think the fastest song right now is 173 BPM. And it's, I think, Paramore, it's one of our actually licensed songs.
It's very fun and fast.
Very fun. So now we talked a lot about the beat and the beat again and beat matching. We also mentioned that this game is a shooter. Even if it's a rhythm shooter, there needs to be some levels of I want to fire a gun here. So, how do we make sure that that firing and that gun is rhythmical? So I thought we should take a look at like what components do we aim for and what components are crucial in order to make sure that an actual weapon is beat matching. So let's take a look at the shotgun, the staple for all shooter games, or I don't know. So we decided that we want a shotgun, and we've decided that, like, cool, that this is gonna be great, and it's gonna be pump action. So that gives us a lot of opportunities because we have like natural actions within the shotgun that kind of lends itself to be rhythmical. We have boom, and then, boom, and then we have the cockback, so it's kind of thing. So that helps a lot when we're just like making the animations and designing for how that behavior goes and how long the fire rate is for it. But the fire is also giving excellent immediate feedback. As we saw earlier with the Vulcan, we're having an explosion a couple of seconds later. But with the shotgun, we have immediate firing the moment you press the button, and you also have immediate feedback on enemies or whatever you're shooting at, because it's reacting as well to your action and to the beat. So that makes it natural usage in being a rhythmic weapon. We just have to make sure that fire rate is also scaled with the beat, so that we have a fire rate, like in Hellsinger, I think the fire rate of the shotgun is 1.7 beats or something, so that you're able to fire it at the upcoming beat. And then we have all of the other components. Like if we're having a weaponing game, we're gonna assume that you want to reload it. So this is also a part of making sure that we scale the adjacent behavior to the beat. Because like there's a mechanical nature to the weapon that gives us a big advantage. Like if you've seen a Hot Fuzz, the Edgar Wright movie, there's a lot of different cuts that's happening to the beat. And taking that into account, we want to make sure that every single action here is also taken into account. I think this has sound, by the way. Let's see. So that every single action that happens here are also rhythmical. And that helps a lot, because it helps like keeping you within the beat. Something we need to take into account that is that animation also has to be scaled, because if it's not, a longer song, as we talked about previously, it's or like a slower song in that case, it's gonna give you more opportunities to be on the beat, because the reload is just taking up a certain space. And a faster song is kind of like, I'm gonna miss more opportunities to be on the beat. So we need to scale that, but also when we take that into account that we're scaling an animation, we don't want the sound to get skewered. Like a faster song would then have a comically high-pitched reload, and the slower song would then have like a super grungy reload, and that would be, we want everything to be grungy here, so taking that into account as well. So I just want to wrap this up and like talk a bit about like what is then the recipe. Like ensure that the action that you have immediate feedback. Look for adding a reaction that enforces the rhythmic behavior, the cockback, and then make sure that those animations are also scaled into the beat, and split your SFX into smaller parts, just to make sure that we start playing those sounds in conjunction with everything. So just to summarize this and to kind of wrap a bow on our talk, do you have to be a musician?
Oh, it looks like it left out some sentences here.
Oh, nice. This is going great.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is supposed to be a summary screen with everything we talked about. It is missing a couple of them. I am sorry. But start off, to answer these things simply, do you have to be a musician? Not really. How do you visualize time? It depends on the other framework you're working with and so on. Is it all about the beat?
No, the goal is rhythm.
Yeah. How do you take a break? Very intentionally, on purpose.
Yeah.
And
how do we get the player to follow the beat?
oh yeah, I mean, it's about being clear and making sure that they know where the information is.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
how do we get the player to march? If the player can't march the drum, how do we deal with that?
well, the biggest point in that was to tie stuff to BPM, because that was something we have to discover several times in our game, which is, you'd think we'd learn.
And then finally, just like, how do I build a shotgun? How do we take all of this knowledge that we've dumped on you now and make a game out of that as well? Because we want to shoot things, right?
Yeah, how do you do that? Or...
make sure it scales with the beat.
Okay, great.
I'd say that's it for us. Thank you. I'm sorry you didn't get to hear the opening song. I'm kind of bummed about that.
Maybe we can go back to that slide.
Maybe.
Well,
Let's see.
because the next one here was just for Q&A.
Let's see. I hope you want to hear some music.
Yes. Now that we have sound.
Let's see.
Oh, yes.
So this as I mentioned before, this is Alyssa White Plus, and she's a part of Arch Enemy, and she's the singer there. And I thought the first time I heard this song, there's actually two vocalists.
She does the growling too. So I guess on top of this, we can say thank you to our team. We appreciate.
Thank you, Game Camp France, for having us as well.
Yes, and we will try to move into some kind of Q&A. Just really wanted to show you the actual game too. Thank you.
There we go.
Woo.
All right. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. I don't know if anyone has mics that help you. Right. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask, you said earlier that there were no rhythm changes during gameplay. Was it intended this way from the very start, or did you try having rhythm changes and it wasn't good anyway?
I think we explored it pretty early if we could have rhythm changes, but it's a technical difficulty as well. Like the backend tool that we're using to kind of like help control the layering of the music and the beat, that kind of also, it created hitches that never felt good for the player as well. So I think that was one of the major drivers for it. Okay. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you regarding the composition for original soundtracks. How do you work with artists that do not compose for game usually? Do you place an order for a piece of music and ask for a specific BPM or time signature, or how did it go?
You go.
Could you take that question again? I was trying to find you, my friend.
Same. Can you wave a little? Ah, yes. Perfect.
Hello, thank you. Could you just repeat that again?
Please, yes.
Yeah, my bad. So my question was regarding the composition process for original soundtracks. How do you work with artists that do not compose for video games usually? And do you order a piece of music and ask for a specific BPM or time signature, or do you give them complete liberty of what they want to do and then process their music in-house?
So throughout the entire production of Metal Hellsinger, we worked with an audio team that's called Two Feathers, and they composed all of the music. And the process was kind of like we knew that we were going to make 8 songs, I think, for the main game, and they got to see the concept art and play the earlier levels and kind of like took that into account, and then they started composing that music, and we reached out to the artist, like Matt, for example, and go like, hey, do you want to sing on our soundtrack? And the vocals that we then wrote was kind of like written in his style. So the BPM was already set before we started doing vocal recording.
Okay, thank you very much.
I kind of want to expand on that too. I feel like I have memories of Two Feathers telling or sharing that when they were writing the songs, they had like a vague idea of who this song would fit. So yes. It wasn't like presented a buffet of songs to the artist, but it was more like, we think you would be really good maybe for this one or this one. What do you think? So some dialogue, at least.
I think the BPM for the Sergei, the final song, the final boss song, the Sergei song was slightly changed, or some tonality was changed in order to like make sure that that also fit that artist. All right, anyone else?
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you very much for your talk. I have a technical question about music integration. What kind of tools did you use? Did you use like audio middleware like Fmod or Wise, or did you create all your tools by scrap?
So no, we used Fmod quite extensively. So the game is running on Unity, and then we had an Fmod integration for it. And it helped us a lot to go just like have good control over the songs and making sure that you're able to have the layering and that's playing in sync.
And did you have to make any changes like custom script for F mode in order to have like decent callbacks for any kind of situation?
I think we have quite a lot of work going on in our audio controller. So we have like a beat controller that reaches out to Fmod, but that's more on how we were working with the beat and the beat matching part to make sure that that's in sync. The songs in themselves and the music, or like the sound effects that we're playing, is very much just callbacks to Fmod.
I also want to point out that if you have, like, it's not very common maybe, but you can actually mod music into this game. If you're familiar with Fmod, it would really help you, because it's a pretty complex process, but it's possible, and there are some tools available online. I think
there's a guide
on our website. Yeah,
on
exactly.
the website.
So sound designers might want to fiddle with that if you really like this game.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm not sure how much
Could you
you
wave,
are.
my friend?
Sorry?
I want to look at you.
Here, on the left.
Ah.
Oh,
Far left.
Hello.
Thank you.
There we go.
Here I go. So I'm not sure how much you are involved in level design, but did you have some issues with levels that were maybe too long because a player will be tired to play in beat all the time?
Yes, so we did a lot of like running through these levels and like taking times to make sure that they're that you're like, okay, we want a level to be somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes long as you play through it. We started running into issues when we like designed the last boss fight, because then you need to get through the entire last level, survive that, and then you like go into a new song, and that's, I think the boss fight is averaging around 10 to 12 minutes. So what we did was a lot of like modulating how many encounters we had in the game. Like we did a lot of tweaking all up until the end with the encounters. That was like our main. So we knew like, okay, it takes this long to run through it, just like run through the level. But then because we have an arena set up, we could just modulate how many waves you were playing with. So that was how we tackled that issue.
I was going to say, from a scoring perspective, there's a lot of spreadsheets going on, trying to figure out how they stand against each other. But so, yes, is the short answer.
Yes. I thought it was...
Hi, here on the left.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I was wondering how you can tackle difficulty and accessibility in a rhythm game like Milla Hellsinger.
Well, for starters, I don't think we launched with it, but it was in our very first patch. We actually have an option in the settings to turn on always on beat, in case you just happen to struggle with that part for reasons that it can't be fixed through difficulty settings. And it does remove you from the leaderboards, but in general it gives you the feeling of always, like you're never gonna miss, and it's gonna feel pretty good, actually.
And something that we're also doing that we didn't touch upon is like we're allowing the player to kind of set up their latency when they start a game also. So that there's a section where you tap 10 times to the beat, and our system is able to recognize how much milliseconds you're off with to kind of like help you get into that. And finally, something that we also didn't mention is I think on a difficulty while we're controlling how the enemies are attacking. So we have attack ticket pools, and they're also tied to the beat. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Yes. First of all, thanks for the talk. It's great to see some fellow Scandies on stage. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on your philosophy in terms of the enemies. Like, how much did it have to pay into the whole beat matching? Are there attacks synced to the beat? Did you encounter that it didn't really matter and they were just there to enable?
So, from my viewpoint, I think there's like two ways to answer this. First of all, like all enemies that are present, they're using like an attack ticket pool system, and that ticket pool is kind of like refilled on the beat, so making sure that the enemies, like they want to start attacking on the beat, and that's happening in conjunction with the beat. And we also did that because we have different BPMs, so we didn't want it to feel faster or slower. And then some enemies, especially the ranged enemies, we do almost always check for the beat, so that we can make sure that that's that feels. Like when we have melee attacks, it's really hard to kind of like showcase that and showcase that feedback is happening on the beat. But on ranged enemies, we do a lot of they wait for the beat and they're firing in sequence of the beat. And finally, their purpose is to die. Like that's why we have enemies. So they just need to die, and if they die spectacularly and cool, that's the main focus. And then they're there to put some friction as well. Thank you for your question.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Cassie. Thank you for a big thanks for the talk. I have a question about the breaks. You said that it was really intentional, it has to be intentional, and that you had a problem with players waiting too long between stages, between fights. And I wanted to know what kind of problems you faced regarding these players who waited too long for not going in a fight. What was why did you had this choice of design?
Wait, so the question is what the... Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Was it how we identified the issues?
Yeah, exactly. With the players creating too long break.
Well, if I understand you correctly, the question is how did we identify these issues? There was a lot of playtesting, really, and because it was a pandemic for a long part of this project here, it was basically me hovering behind my friend playing the game and like, God dang it, they're getting stuck again. Why aren't they just moving? I'm writing angry notes. I'm going to share with my entire team, and then we're going to have a conversation about the flow of the game.
And we also did a lot of stuff when we're like, even if it was pandemic, we played through the game together and felt like, okay, this is too long of a break, and this is not helping you push forward. Right?
Yeah.
And also being part of FUNCOM, we had the opportunity to have the entirety of FUNCOM playtest as well. So even if we didn't like get all of our friends to sign NDAs, we could also use that to our advantage.
Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk. I had a question about the level design. My question was in terms of the difficulty curve of the game. Which means did you use to make the level like harder and harder as the game goes on, and how were you communicating with the artists so they can create the song that actually achieve this kind of ramp up in difficulty?
That's an interesting question.
Do you want to go?
I mean, you're the combat designer, so I feel like this is more on you, but for me as an outsider, no pun, silly, we work at the outsiders, it really, Heike, you take it. I have ideas, but it's too slow.
So I'd say like in the level design and its purpose that it felt for Hellsinger, it was very much to like, we kept arenas, so it was like, we had corridor, arena, boss fight. We tried to keep it very simple in order to allow us to focus on the combat and the beat matching. But what we did was very much like gradually introducing enemies that were more and more intensive and difficult to deal with, finding new ways that they could fire at you to like require you to learn new things. And also when it comes to level design, what we notice, and if you see how players are moving through the arenas, like the player character is very agile, and when we start removing space from the player, you have to think about your spatial awareness in a whole other way. So that's like one way how we dealt with level design, is just like the further up you came, the tighter the arenas became, in order to like force the players to think about new ways of dealing with the same issue.
And also the more mobile the enemies become, I suppose.
That's correct. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Hi. Here. I was just wondering, just in a technical aspect, like how do you detect the beat, being sure it is in sync? How did you do that?
I am sorry if I can't answer this question correctly, but I think we have a callback into Fmod that making sure that we can start it. And like the moment we start the song, we also start a secondary counter in Unity that's like refreshing at the time intervals of the beat. But I wouldn't use that as your guide when you're programming your rhythm game. I don't know how the code wizards came up with it.
Thanks.
Let's see, is there anyone else?
Yes. So it's literally it's literally the same questions. I'm not sure I didn't understand how you locked the game to 60 FPS and how you're making sure that on every computer that can run the game, you make sure the music and the sound design wasn't out of sync. So did you use a beat repeat or something just to check every beat the sound and just stretch it out, or you just cut in segment and it just cues after another?
Oh, that's a good question. So just to understand you correctly, how we like make sure that the beat is not getting skewered by not having it at 60 frames. So I think we're running it at a second thread or something like that. Like by the nature, I think Unity is kind of hard to use when it's come to multi-threading. So if I recall correctly, it's something about like we're running the beat matching stuff on a secondary thread in order to make sure that that's always happening. But we're also using like some magic with delta time in order to make sure that. But I don't think I can answer that question like fully for you to help you with that. But like also using 60 frames like per second as an example to help communicate how we're thinking about the beat and what kind of window we're thinking about, because that becomes an issue when we're starting to look at beat matching. It's like, okay, we can't go, like, if we're going faster or if we're having a smaller window, there's not enough cycles on all machines to make sure that they're beat matching at that point. So it's like tied to that issue.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Was there anyone else? Am I missing anyone? I'm trying to scour the room. I don't think so. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.